Hey guys, how's it going? We're on my Frost Mage, and I'm going to be doing a 7.3 crash course for PvP slash kind of PvP guide. That's just kind of a quick run through of Frost Mage, so you should be able to just have a general idea of how to play this after this recording. So, starting out, we're going to go over spells, rotation, abilities, honor talents, normal talents, and your rotation, and then your burst. And then outside of that, I guess you can talk about CC and like artifact traits, but let's just get into the talents, or not talents, the abilities. So Blizzard, everyone knows what this is. It's been an ability since vanilla. I'll show you guys right here. It's this thingy right here. It does that, and it has a chance to proc Fingers of Frost, which is your kind of buff spell that buffs your Ice Lance. Cold Snap resets the cooldown of your Frost Nova. Cone of Cold, Ice Barrier, and Ice Block. We'll talk about that later. Comet Storm is a talent, so I'll talk about that later. Cone of Cold I don't really use. If anything, you're going to want to use it when there's a melee on you and you need to slow them, because it's those are 70%, which is a decent amount, even though I don't find myself using this ability all that much. Conjure Refreshment, it makes you food. It's nothing too important, but it's kind of useful sometimes. Counter Spells that interrupt. Counters enemy spell cast, preventing any spell from that school of magic from being cast for 6 seconds. So it's our interrupt, really. It's on a 24-second cooldown, but I do think it does like lock someone out of the spell school longer than most interrupts do. Ebon Bolt is our artifact ability. Deals 927,000 Shadow Frost damage and causes Brain Freeze. Basically, it's just it's like a Glacial Spike, which is just a hard-hitting ability. It basically just hits super hard. That's the only thing I really have to say about it. Flurry. Unleash a flurry of ice, striking the target 3 times for a total of 492,000 frost damage. Each hit reduces the target's movement speed by 70% for 1 second. While Brain Freeze is active, Flurry also applies Winter's Chill to the target. And Winter's Chill basically makes it so you crit and do frozen damage with your Ice Lance. Frost Nova basically just roots someone in place. It's that thing. That guy won't be able to move, he's frozen in place. Next is Frostbolt. Launches a bolt of frost at the target, causing 225,000 frost damage and slowing the movement speed by 50% for 15 seconds. This is our main ability. It's our filler ability. When you don't have anything else to cast, you're going to want to cast this. It does this, and it generates icicles, which I'll talk about later. Frozen Orb launches an orb of swirling ice up to 40 yards up forward, which deals up to 620,000 frost damage on enemies it passes through. It grants 1 Fingers of Frost proc when it damages its first enemy. So I'm going to shoot it out there, and I'm going to get a Fingers of Frost proc, which is this thing. And it basically just does damage in a circle. Ice Barrier is our mage shield. Every mage spec has a shield. This is for Frost. Shields you for 1 minute, absorbing 933,000 damage. Melee attacks against you reduce attackers' movement speed by 50%. Nothing too exciting there. Ice Block is a bubble for mages, except you can't cast in it. In case you in a block of ice, protecting you from all attacks and damage from 10 seconds, and during that time you cannot move, attack, or cast spells. Causes hypothermia, preventing you from recasting Ice Block, which is basically the reason it applies the debuff is because you can just cold snap. If you didn't have that debuff, you could cold snap an Ice Block again right out of it. And then Ice Lance is, I'd say, is our main ability, like the one you're going to be using the most. Quickly fling a shard of ice at the target, dealing 107,000 frost damage. Ice Lance damage is tripled against frozen targets. So if I hit this guy right now, I hit him for 123,000. If I freeze him and then hit him, it's going to hit him for 1 million. Obviously, that's not triple the damage. It's more like 10 times the damage, but I'm sure certain talents make that hit a lot harder. Ice Nova is a talent. I'll talk about that later. Icy Veins accelerates your spell casting for 20 seconds, granting 30% haste and preventing damage from delaying your spell cast. This is our one offensive cooldown, really. It does buff our damage, which I'll get into later because it's an artifact trait. Invisibility turns you invisible for 3 seconds, reducing threat each second. While invisible, you are untargetable by enemies. Last 20 seconds, taking any action cancels this effects. So even if you use like anything or get attacked or anything outside of just like walking around, you'll get taken out of invis. Polymorph is our CC. Transforms your target into a sheep. Basically, it's like a fear, except it turns someone into a sheep. Portal, don't really need to talk about that. Shimmer is a talent, which is our blink. Everyone knows what blink does, just does this. Slow fall, don't really need to talk about that. It's the same thing that it says in talent, or the name. Spell Steal steals the beneficial magic effects from the target. This effect lasts a maximum of 2 minutes. This is pretty useful. You can Spell Steal Blessing and Protection, which is a bubble that Pallies can cast on other people. Other than that, you're gonna want to use this, I'd say. Like, you'll see when you can Spell Steal stuff, because it'll say, like, under their name. Like, the thing will be highlighted, kind of like that portal thing, where it's kind of brighter than all the other spells. So, outside of that, there's Time Warp, which is our Bloodlust. And then, let's talk about the procs that we have. Why is Ice Lance in my book twice? That's weird. Okay. Brain Freeze. Frostbolt has a 23% chance to empower your next flurry to be instant cast, deal 50% and increase damage, and apply Winter's Chill to target. Winter's Chill causes your target to take damage from your spells as if it were frozen. So basically, if I get a Brain Freeze proc, you're going to want to use Flurry and then Ice Lance followed by it. Fingers of Frost. Frostbolt and Frozen Orb damage have a 12% chance to grant a charge of Fingers of Frost. Fingers of Frost causes your next Ice Lance to deal damage as if the target were frozen. This is kind of what our class or spec is built around. If you have Fingers of Frost, you're going to want to use Ice Lance because it's going to do a lot of damage. Icicles. When you damage enemies with Frostbolt, 55.8% of the damage done is stored as an icicle for 1 minute. Also increases damage done by your water elemental. On PvP, this doesn't really apply since most of the time you're going to be taking Lonely Winter. Casting Ice Lance causes any icicles stored to begin launching at the target. Up to 5 icicles can be stored. Excess icicles will launch automatically. Basically, it's extra damage. Shatter. Multiplies the critical strike chance of your spells against frozen targets by 1.5 and adds an additional 50% critical strike chance. Basically, it says if the target's frozen, you're going to crit them. That's all that's saying. So, now that we've gone over all of the spells, really, let's go into talents. So, most of the time you're going to want to take Lonely Winter, unless you're specifically wanting to run Water Elemental for some reason. I don't think, really, it's between Lonely Winter and Bone Chilling. Lonely Winter increases the damage you do by 28% from your Frostbolt, Ice Lance, Water Elemental, Flurry, and Frozen Orb. So basically your main spells are going to hit harder. Outside of that, Bone Chilling just gives you a flat 6% increase to your damage and makes it so you still have your Water Elemental. With Lonely Winter, it'll get rid of your Water Elemental. And Ray of Frost, I haven't used it. I kind of want to try Ray of Frost with Ice Flows. Other than that, I'd take Lonely Winter in most situations. So, next talent row is Shimmer. Replaces Blink, teleports you 20 yards forward unless something is in the way, unaffected by global cooldown, and castable while casting. Basically, you can cast and blink at the same time now. And it gives you 2 charges. Ice Flows makes your next mage spell with a cast time shorter than 10 seconds, castable while moving, unaffected by global cooldown, and castable while casting. Max 3 charges. Again, this is like, it's like a Spirit Walker's Grace, if you know what that is. It basically lets you cast while moving. Glacial Insulation, I haven't used it. It seems pretty, I mean, you could try it if you're going against a really melee-heavy team. Other than that, I don't think I'd take it all that much. I want to see what my armor would be like with it. So without 20%, 34%. So basically, you're going to take less damage if you do have that against people who are melee. If they aren't melee, I wouldn't really suggest taking that. For the 4th row, I don't like Rune of Power all that much. It basically just increases the spell damage, but you have to stay in like a certain area. Outside of that, there's Mirror Image, which just does, it creates 3 copies of you and then casts Frostbolt, and I think each Mirror Image hits for like 50,000, which it adds up over time if people don't focus the Mirror Images, but in most situations I just like Incantress Flow, basically because it's applied to you at all times. Builds up to 20% increased damage, then diminished down to 4% increased damage, cycling every 10 seconds. Basically, it gives you increased damage all the time. So that's why I take it. For the 4th row, Ice Nova, Frozen Touch, Splitting Ice. For PvP, I all the time just take Ice Nova, mainly because you can line this up. Since it applies a freeze, you can usually line this up with Ebon Bolt. So you'd want to Ebon Bolt and Ice Nova, and it'll crit. And then outside of that, you're going to, like, it just works really well into our burst rotation. That's what I'm trying to get at. Outside of that, if you just want to run, I guess, a kind of more AoE build, you could run Splitting Ice, which makes it so your Glacial Spike and Ice Lance and Icicles now hit additional target for 80% of the damage. Frozen Touch, if you really want to generate a lot of Fingers of Frost, then go for it. So the 75 row talent, Ring of Frost. If you really want to CC someone, I would suggest this because you can just sheep them and then put this under them and then it'll freeze them. Very good wins if you really want the slow or the increased slow on all of your spells. But I just like Ice Ward mainly because I like having 2 charges on Frost Nova. Because what's better than 1 Frost Nova is having 2 Frost Novas, because it's annoying for melees to try to attack you. Outside of that, I like Arctic Gale. Increases Blizzard's damage by 30% and its area of effects by 20%. Basically makes it so your Blizzard, the circle thing that's right there, is bigger, and it does increase damage. Unstable magic if you find yourself spamming Frostbolt a lot, even though 50% additional damage to the target and all other enemies. With Frostbolt, that's like 50,000 damage, which isn't a whole lot, and I feel like Arctic Gale's a lot better. I haven't even used Frostbomb, so I have no input on that, really. So the bottom row talents, I'd say, are the most adjustable ones, as always. Comet Storm, I'd like using this for 2v2s, 3v3s, anything where you can't really get a Glacial Spike off. Calls down a series of 7 icy comets on and around the target, each of which deals 91,000 frost damage to all enemies within 6 yards of its impact. Basically, I'll show you guys what it does. It does this. It looks cool. That's like the one thing it does. Other than that, it just does damage. Glacial Spike conjures a massive spike of ice into and merges your current icicles into it, impales your target, dealing 1.2 million damage, plus the damage stored in your icicles, and freezes the target in place for 4 seconds. Damage may interrupt the freeze effect. Requires 5 icicles to cast. So this works into your mastery, which basically generates icicles whenever you use Flurry or Frostbolt, I believe. So once you get 5 of those icicles, you can use the spell, and it's basically just, it usually hits for 1 million, I'd say, in PvP. I like it for Battlegrounds because most of the time you can get those icicles very easily, but for 2v2s and 3v3s, if you're running this and you can't generate icicles, you can't really Glacial Spike all that much. Going to Thermal Void, Icy Vein's duration is increased by 10 seconds, and as I said before, this is our offensive cooldown that increases our haste by 30%. And then, if you Ice Lance against a frozen target, it extends your Icy Veins by an additional 1 second. So basically, it makes it so Icy Veins last longer. That's all it does. So going into Artifact, that kind of works. Artifact does have a lot of traits that kind of work into our playstyle somewhat. The main one I'd say is Freezing Rain, which casting Frozen Orb reduces the cast time of Blizzard. So if I throw my Frozen Orb out, it's basically going to make my Blizzard instant cast. So now I have Frozen Orb and Blizzard out there. Outside of that, you also have this, which when Ebon Bolt damages a target, a pillar of ice bursts down from the ground to that location after 1 second, dealing certain amount of Shadow Frost damage. So if I Ebon Bolt this guy here, you'll see that the Ebon Bolt goes off, and then you'll see like a little spike right there. That's that talent. Outside of that, there's this, which activating Icy Veins encases you in ice, increasing your frost damage dealt by 20%. Basically increases your damage by 20% whenever you pop Icy Veins. What else? This increases the maximum charges of Fingers of Frost you can hold by 1, so it goes from like 2 to 3, I believe. Not really that important. I don't think any of the other ones are really that important. Frostbolt crits and Power Ice Lance increases damage dealt by 10% for 6 seconds, stacks up to 3 times. So you could, if you spam Frostbolt a lot, get a higher hitting Ice Lances, but I don't really suggest it if you do have Fingers of Frost procs. Outside of that, none of these are really all that important. You can use this. Ebon Bolt has a chance to empower icicles, increasing damage done by 100%. So if you use this in Glacial Spike, it's just going to hit harder. Okay, on to Honor Talents. Gladiator's Medallion, just your go-to. It's a PvP trinket. That's all you need to know, really. Mine, Quickness, I like it because of the haste. You can use Train of Thought if you do want the damage increase, but if you do get hit, it does cancel it, so that's kind of a worthless trait to me. Most of the time, I do take Mind Quickness just for the haste increase. For the third row, I'd take Prismatic Cloak against anyone that's a caster-heavy team. So, Boomkin, Shadow Priest, Affliction Lock, anything like that. Outside of that, Netherwind Armor if you're going against a Demon Hunter, Rogue, Warrior, any team that crits a lot. Outside of that, Burning Determination. I don't think I've used this all that much, but if you think you're going to get interrupted a lot, I would suggest it. Fourth row, Temporal Shield. It's a heal. Basically, I think it was called Time Shield before, but Basically envelops you in a temporal shield for 6 seconds. 100% of all damage taken while shielded will be instantly restored when the shield ends. This can be spell stolen or purged, however, so you want to be careful about that. So if you're going against a shaman or anyone that can like steal this or anything, you might want to take the other 2 talents. But other than that, in Battlegrounds, it's really useful. If you do find yourself getting hit a lot, if you find yourself getting focused a lot, just pop this and you'll get all the damage that you did take back in health. Kleptomania is the other one that's kind of used more. I tried this in 2s this week against a Resto Druid, and it did help a shit ton, because you only have to press Spell Steal once and it steals all of their hots. So if you're going against a Resto Druid, anyone that has a lot of buffs, even Disc Priest, Resto Druid, anyone that's pretty dependent on magical effects on a target to get their damage off, I would suggest using this. Dampen Magic, this is just a passive. If you're going against an Affliction Warlock, Shadow Priest, Boomkin, anyone that has a damage over time effects, just take this. Okay, so 5th row, Chill to the Bone. Haven't really used it. I kind of want to experiment with it, mainly because against melees it would be pretty cancerous, and it's just extra damage. I would suggest it for Battlegrounds. This is really good with the, whatever this is called, Ice Ward talent. Basically makes it so your Frost Nova deals damage after the effect ends. Other than that, Frostbite's really good. Your chill effects have a 15% chance to freeze a target for 4 seconds. Basically makes it so you have a chance to freeze someone really randomly. And basically every single one of your spells applies a freeze effect, or a chill effect, so basically makes it so you're constantly at a chance of freezing someone in place. Haven't really used Deep Shatter. Frostbolt deals 150% additional damage to frozen targets. Frostbolt, Frozen Orb, Blizzard Freeze, Waterbolt, and Water Jet can no longer generate Fingers of Frost, though, which that doesn't make all that much sense to me, so that's why I don't take it. Outside of that, Concentrated Coolness is usually the talent I run. Frozen Orb's damage increased by 225%, is now castable at a location with 40-yard range, but no longer moves. Basically makes it so your Frozen Orb kind of turns into a Blizzard where you kind of aim it, and then does increase damage. Burst of Cold, Frost Nova instantly resets the cooldown of your Cone of Cold and increases its damage by 400% for 6 seconds. Basically makes it so your Cone of Cold hits harder. I kind of want to try this talent sometime, so I'm probably going to do that. Ice Form, this is good if you really want to increase damage from your artifact trait, which is this. Activating Icy Veins, increase your damage by 20%. So this replaces Icy Veins, so basically you get a 20% increase to your Frost damage and your Frostbolt every 1 minute, so that's why I'd take it. Other than that, I just like taking Concentrated Coolness in most situations. So let's get into the rotation. The rotation of Frost Mage is very simple, I'd say. Basically, ideally, you're going to want to have your Frozen Orb on cooldown and use your Blizzard, whatever, instant cast. And then if you can, like if you're really trying to just play around a certain area, you'd probably want to put your Blizzard down, just so it slows people. Other than that, you're going to want to keep your Ebon Bolt on cooldown, your Ice Nova. I'll just show you guys. Basically, you're going to want to just use fucking Frostbolt a lot until you get procs. Whenever you get procs or a Brain Freeze proc, you're going to want to follow that with an Ice Lance like I did there. That'll launch all of your icicles into the target. Outside of that, you're basically just going to want to watch out for procs. Getting a lot of Brain Freeze procs for some reason. That's about it. You know, you just kind of Frostbolt. And then outside of that, I guess cooldown-wise, when you Frozen Orb, you're going to want to put down your Blizzard. Whenever you get Fingers of Frost procs, you're going to want to use that. The only thing I'd watch out for is if you get a Brain Freeze proc while you have a Fingers of Frost proc, you're going to want to save the Brain Freeze proc until after you get rid of all your Fingers of Frost procs. Because if you use your Fingers of Frost proc with a Brain Freeze proc, it kind of gets rid of the purpose of the Winter's Bite thing. That is the debuff that's applied after you use Flurry. Outside of that, if there's a lot of people in a group, I don't think it's an AoE, but if there's like 4 people together, Blizzard does reduce the cooldown of your Frozen Orb, so keep that in mind. So if there's a lot of people in one group, you're going to want to put down a Blizzard, and it will reduce the cooldown of your Frozen Orb, which means you're going to be able to get your Frozen Orb more, and you're going to be able to get a lot more Fingers of Frost procs out, which means you're going to be able to get a lot more Ice Lances off, which means a lot more damage. Outside of that, just make sure whenever you launch your Frozen Orb out there, you're going to want to put down your instant cast Blizzard. If you're using Comet Storm, just use this whenever it's up, really. And then, if your Ebon Bolt's up, usually I like to Ebon Bolt and then follow it with an Ice Nova, so the Ebon Bolt always crits. And then just Flurry and then Ice Lance. Outside of that, that's basically the rotation. Burst-wise, it's the same thing. When you burst, it's a weird rotation. You come out of Invis, usually, like, in most cases when you burst, it's going to be an arena, so you're going to come out of Invis, you're going to Icy Veins. Personally, I like throwing my Frozen Orb down. Some people will leap out of it or just try to get out of it immediately. Outside of that, you're probably going to want to try to open up with an Ebon Bolt, followed by an Ice Nova. Usually what I do, actually, I'll show you, is I throw down my Frozen Orb, throw my Blizzard down, try to get an Ebon Bolt off, follow that up with a Comet Storm, and then try to freeze them in place with Ice Nova. So let's try to do that here. So we'll pop my cooldowns, throw my Frozen Orb down, do that, Ebon Bolt, Comet Storm, Ice Nova, Flurry, and then that. And you'll see there, 1.425 million damage. That's kind of your burst. And then outside of that, you just kind of go into your normal rotation, or you just pray to God that you get procs and just don't have to just cast Frostbolt. Other than that, that's Frost Mage. It's really fun. It's one of the mage specs that you can do a lot of damage. You have a lot of slows. You have a lot of you have a really good kit, I'd say. Keep in mind you have Ice Block and you can Cold Snap to refresh it. Keep in mind you have a Blink, you have a Spell Steal, you have a Slow that is applied to people in melee range. That's about it. That is Frost Mage. Just slow people, guys. It's not that hard. Just use your procs when you have them. Try not to use your Ice Lance whenever you have a Brain Freeze proc. Use your Fingers of Frost before your Brain Freeze. Use Ice Lance after your Brain Freeze. Try to use your Ebon Bolt with Ice Nova, and then Flurry, and then Ice Lance to line up that damage. Outside of that, use Blizzard in AoE situations, use Frozen Orb in AoE situations, and spam the shit out of Ice Lance. And that's Frost Mage. It's not a hard spec. Most of the specs aren't that hard anymore, but there's a few that are kind of more in-depth, kind of, I dare say, but most of them are just, you can pick up fairly easy if you just do like 10 battlegrounds on them. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. If you guys liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Let me know what videos you guys want to see from my channel. Let me know, in general, what you want to see from this channel in the future. As always, thank you guys for watching. Feel free to follow my social media. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do all that jazz. Try to catch me live streaming. I'm going to have a schedule here soon once I get back into like a new work schedule. So, yeah, as always, thank you guys for watching. Until next time, I'll see you guys later.